Today on the Mr. Maple Show podcast, Matt and Tim discuss Japanese maple master and legend, Masayoshi Yano-san.
Howdy, y'all, and welcome to the Mr. Maple Show. We're the brothers that do MrMaple.com, and today we're going to be doing a podcast for you about some of our favorite maple people. Today we're going to do a highlight specifically on the late, great Masayoshi Yano.
Yeah, I'd really like to call this the Mount Rushmore of Japanese maples. When we highlight these people who contributed so much to maples, many of y'all may have in your garden. Masayoshi Yano was someone who was dear to me and Matt. We got to go visit him, and we'll talk a little bit about that, talk about some of his introductions and some of his contributions and his life, which primarily was focused around maples.
Yeah, Yano was one of the all-time greats. He's one of those ones, I'm putting that one on the resume that I got to go hang out with him. For me, that's a big part of just Japanese maple lore and history. The man was just instrumental with Japanese maples, and his contributions can't be overlooked. So we wanted to kind of highlight him. He passed away last year, and he leaves a legacy that's just huge for Japanese maples. Now, Tim and I first visited Masayoshi Yano many years ago, and we had a trip planned. Tim actually had a trip planned that got canceled, but he had an expensive plane ticket. And so we were already in even like over $1,000 on this plane ticket. And I said, bro, why don't you take this chance? When are you ever going to have a better chance if they can transfer your ticket? Take this expensive ticket you're not using now and go to Japan and visit Yano-san. He said, I'd love to. And it kind of worked out a little serendipitously because I wasn't planning to go. I got married and my wife and I were on our honeymoon, and we were going to return. And then within a week, Tim was taking his trip, and she said, you have to go. And I said, why? It's going to be like, we're just going to be getting back from our honeymoon like the week before that. And she said, you're never going to forgive yourself if he goes and you don't go. You need to make this trip. So my wife twisted my arm against my own good judgment. That's how you know you got a good wife. She said, no, you're going on this trip. What are you thinking? You're crazy? You want to do this. So I got back from my honeymoon, and Tim and I departed on our first trip for Japan, which was just an amazing experience. And the highlight of that whole trip was getting to visit Yano-san.
Now, guys, we're MrMaple.com. We're that family mail order business. We ship directly to your door. We do over 1,000 varieties of Japanese maples, so check us out on MrMaple.com. And also make sure you find us on your favorite podcast platform. Guys, give us a 5-star rating. We'd really appreciate it. It helps more people see it. And also check us out on YouTube. We've got a video component for this as well on YouTube.
So, yeah, we got to go and visit Yano in fall of 2015. And it was an amazing experience. Tim and I went over to World Maple Park. We scheduled to visit Masayoshi Yano, and we were worried about, obviously Tim and I weren't fluent in Japanese. We're still not fluent in Japanese, but we definitely weren't then. We picked up some pleasantries to get around in Japan since then. But, we'd contacted him and we'd said, sir, we'd love to meet with you. And we were so honored when we got to World Maple Park. We drove there. He had a gentleman waiting to meet us at the entrance, and then 2 younger translators, as well as a third in case it was needed. And he spent the better part of a day walking through the park with Tim and I. We took our friend Augustin Coelho Vera, who was in Japan for a satellite conference. He devised a satellite system, so we took him along with us. And we said, hey, you're never going to have a better chance to get to visit Mr. Yano and kind of just ask him questions with these translators. So we spent, at least 4 or 5 hours walking around World Maple Park with him, having lunch, and just kind of experiencing things with him showing us some of his new introductions, some of his trees. He allowed us to collect seeds and just kind of get engulfed in all the just maple madness we could get in there together. And it was so much fun because we had a kinship there. You talk about this kinship, but when you have something that you've devoted so much of your life to and you meet somebody else that's so into the same thing, there's a friendship there. And so we definitely had this kinship with Yano-san just out the gate because he was so nice and so gracious to kind of just let Tim and I just geek out as well and go around and be excited and talk about trees.
I mean, that's the thing that I loved about this trip. We drove over 3,000 miles in Japan. The highlight of this entire trip on our first trip to Japan was going to visit Masayoshi Yano. And that person that was waiting at the park, that was the director of World Maple Park. Now, Masayoshi Yano, he actually, in the 1970s, created a maple garden in Nara, which he named and opened to the public, called Gan Kaede Tai. And that later eventually developed into what World Maple Park was. It became so popular that they decided, this is one of the most popular things we could do. Yano-san is such an expert. We're going to open up World Maple Park at a school. And so they had an old school, and they turned that into World Maple Park. And it's maples upon maples upon maples. And Matt and I were interviewing Masayoshi Yano and asking him, how many different varieties do you have here? And he had over 1,300 varieties at the time when we visited him.
I joked with him that he cheated. He did think it was funny. We told him we had 1,000 at the time, but he named over 600 of his. So
yeah, he named almost half of his introductions.
But he didn't cheat at all. I won all 600 of his introductions. They're amazing.
But so many amazing plants. The thing that I love about Masayoshi Yano is he was so gracious with his time. He spent a lot of time with us, walking us around the place and seeing all these amazing trees that he'd introduced and that he'd collected. But he has a history with all the nurseries in Japan. They all know Masayoshi Yano. Mm-hmm. And he's a collector that turned expert. I mean, he started collecting Japanese maples when he was 40 years old. And he passed away at the age of 88 in the summer of 2023.
Now, what many of you have heard of Masayoshi Yano is Book for Maples. This was his book that came out in 2003. It is one of the few English-speaking and Japanese books on Japanese maples, so it's a bilingual book, and it has some of his excellent photography. Yano-san got into photography through his time as a photographer for food. He would go around and take pictures of food in really high-end restaurants in Kyoto. A lot of smaller leaves that would go and kind of adorn, sashimi meals or something like that. And so he would go and decorate these meals with Japanese maple leaves. Over time, he started selecting trees specifically for that. And he came up with a really small leaf type, basically for, adorning dishes with.
And I've heard that one be called Acer palmatum Masayoshi, and some people call it Acer palmatum Yano. But he actually learned his photography under a really famous photographer in Japan, a guy that did a lot of landscapes in Uda named Taji Iri. And he's really famous, and that's who Yano studied photography under. Mm-hmm. And then once he started doing the food garnishment and taking the photos, he became famous all over Japan for his food photography. And he was working with all the top restaurants in Japan, mm-hmm. especially in the Kansai region.
Yeah, and this just kind of led to, more experimentation with Japanese maples. He was using them as this garnish to kind of, make the dishes look a little more appealing. It's like, why don't we put some red foliage in there? Why don't we put some green foliage? Oh, there's a lot of different colors going on here. What else is out there? And that kind of led to his love of Japanese maples and his advancement of them. So from there, Yano started selecting and kind of picking his own selections a little bit, finding out things he liked, and also diving heavily into collecting.
Now, when we visited Yano-san in Japan, one of the things that I treasure the most is a lot of the photographs that we purchased that were prints that he had made from photographs that he did of maples. And he was one of the very best photographers. He would take off branches from the trees, photograph them on a white background, and it would just look exquisite. And being able to photograph the differences in the leaf morphology on all these different varieties, I guess was one of his favorite things. And he really photographed maples in a way that other people hadn't seen many other people do.
Yeah, he had an artistic view for this. Him and Talon Buchholz have a big kinship and a big friendship, and some of that stems for their love of photography as well as maples, so they connect on that level. But certainly some of the best horticulture photographers for what they do. Now,
Masayoshi Yano, he's introduced so many amazing varieties when it comes to Japanese maples. We start going down the list. Plants that we've got at Mr. Maple in production. I know a lot of people have been freaking out about the photos we've shared of Naniwa Beni. Oof. That's one of Masayoshi Yano's introductions. Makawa Nishiki, like a Higashiyama style that's just got like a Makawa-like leaf that's variegated. It's more of an upright. That's one of his introductions. Kenbu. I mean, Kenbu is one that Talon Buckholz has really offered a lot of. Yano introduced this as a seedling from Scolopendra folium that he found, and it's just got irregular foliage to it, and really awesome lunar lobum style. Now, here's one that most of y'all probably have, Kurohime.
Oh, wow, yeah. He had some hitters.
Yeah, Kurohime, that's a classic that is a little dwarf, sometimes referred to as black-red princess, a little compact form, purple new growth. That is one that really hit the trade about 2008. Mm-hmm. People found Masayoshi Yano's book and went crazy with some of his introductions and the trees that he made famous through his writings. Now, originally this book was introduced, and they actually brought him over to Portland, to the Portland Japanese Gardens, and sold tons of copies, and he went around and autographed them here in the United States. You know, I didn't know about this, or I would have freaked out back then and tried to get out there to meet him. But
you're still in high school. You're like 13.
Yeah, these books are extremely rare and really difficult and hard to find.
Right.
I mean, it took forever for Matt and I to track one of these books down, and when you do find it, you know, this is a $250 to $500 book often. And it's extremely rare. It's out of print. And finding this book was one of those things that just opened my eye to what was out there in the maple world.
Yeah, it's a great book. Tim and I have purchased a copy online, just got lucky when we kept shopping for it. We did receive a signed copy, which was pretty cool. You know, later we got to meet Masayoshi Yano and become friends with him and develop that friendship. And it was interesting, you know, the world we live in, because we really became friends with him first on Facebook. So Tim and I, as well as our mother, had added Masayoshi Yano on Facebook, and we would kind of tease each other back in the day a little bit. It was kind of a badge of honor. We would load a maple picture and would be like, did Yano like your picture today? Because Yano commented and liked under my picture. So back when he was real active on Facebook, Tim and I really got the biggest kick out of him corresponding with us through that and sending us little messages and, you know, saying how much he liked a certain plant that we were introducing or looking at and things like that. So it became this little competition with Tim and I. I'd be like, I saw that the photo you took did not get Yano's approval. We really enjoyed that relationship kind of developing. And I guess over several years, we felt more that we knew him almost personally, even though we hadn't met in person. So when we did get to meet him finally, there was a level of respect, and I think he knew that Tim and I were very serious about this and that we love this and this is our passion, and he treated us as such. I mean, to be fair, if we were probably from Japan, we wouldn't be of an age to even approach Yano-san, being young guys. It was some of the older traditions, but Yano embraced Tim and I and was so kind, so giving of his time, and so cool. I mean, he was just so cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things that was the most impressive to me was his generosity.
Right.
I mean, we walked around the gardens, and he was like, I would like to give you a gift. What kind of gift can I give you? And I said, well, may we collect seed? I mean, that's probably unheard of for many people in Japan because Yano also collects seed on those plants.
Right. This is a breeding program.
This is a breeding program at World Maple Park, and he allowed us to collect seed. And Yano specifically has a tree where it's an Acer oliveranum that he had at World Maple Park that was the parent to codenamed Nakahara Beni A and Nakahara Beni B. Those later became Hot Sauce and Hot Tamale.
That was at Yano's request. So we messaged Yano-san and we said, hey, we've got Nakahara Beni A now, and it's the most red form. The Nakahara Beni B has been in the U.S. for a while, but it's only been under the term Nakahara Beni. And he said, well, I don't want the trees to go out under that name. I'm asking you that if you do sell these, that you put a new name on them. And so, you know, people laugh at some of our gimmicky names because we had Hot Blonde already. So we turned out Hot Tamale and Hot Sauce. But Yano said, love it. You know, make sure to put something on it that means something to you, that you like, that's interesting, that'll help us sell this great plant, because he liked the plants. And so he wanted him to have cool names. And he didn't want him to go out under a code name that didn't make sense. That was really his main goal there. And so we got the blessing on that. We did finally select two different trees we will be introducing into the trade from that time of collecting seeds with Yano-san. One is a snake bark that we call Yano's Gift. And this was from one of his most variegated snake bark seedlings he had there. So it was a seedling already, extremely variegated. Yano said, please take some seed. And one of the offspring of those became a very, very white variegated snake bark. We really liked it, and so we're going to be using that one as Yano's gift going forward. So the second of those selections that we made from that seed batch was from that Acer Liviernum that has some hybrids going on with all this cool collection going on there. So it's probably a hybrid with some of the palmatums. But Yano-san allowed us to collect some seed from that tree. Now, we actually found one that had a more sessilifolium style leaf, so more of a Hagoromo style leaf to that. On an Acer Liviernum, which we thought was quite striking. Looks like feathers on the leaf, almost looks like little feathers. So this one did become hot chicken as part of that series as well. And just another cool plant that, really was a gift from Yano.
Now, on that trip, when we were going around visiting his garden, we walked around and checked out all of his cool garden and really immersed ourselves in with Yano. And then once he realized how much of a maple geek we were, and he realized, I've got some guys who really enjoy this stuff, he took us to his hidden greenhouse on the back side. And at his back greenhouse, that was essentially his Area 51.
Right.
And back there, at the time, he had a sessilifolium that was from the Acer Oliveranum. And he was so proud of that one tree. And that's a sister seedling, essentially, to the one that we is hot chicken.
Yeah, if he had showed us that, we might not have realized what we had when we found our own. We might have confused it. So that helped confirm with us that there were sessilifolium styles from there. He had some crazy variegated stuff. He had stuff you rarely see species-wise, and then he would have a variegated selection of it back there in that area. Really cool. Something else really fun, he took us to Maple Cafe. So he had this cafe there in the park, and Yano-san had lined the whole day out. He had plans for us the whole time we were there. Like I said, someone received us as soon as we got there, brought us to Yano-san, and we spent several hours walking. So then we decided it was time for lunch, so he took us to the Momiji Cafe. And this was a popular joint. There was a lot of people in there. Like, it was busy. And so in the Maple Cafe, there's a lot of maple-related products. So that was kind of cool, too. So there was a lot of things that had maple themes to them. It was at that point our friend Atsushi Homa gave us the drink, the cider that he colors with maples. That was really fun. He was one of the younger guys there helping translate. So we had some maple cider that was pretty tasty. I really enjoyed that. He takes 40 red maple leaves just to create the color on this glass, or on the actual liquid. So it's got this real bright pink red color from red maple leaves. And everything there was maple themed. Now, it didn't stop there. Yano-san could tell how kind of crazy we were about this. So he took us to his library where he kept all of his maple books. And we both marveled in all the, the rare editions he had of all these different books, some of which I hadn't even seen before. And then we went to his clothing place. So this was really cool. So sometimes when they're out of leaf in World Maple Park, Yano-san would use many of the areas to display his maple clothing. So he would have traditional kimonos and different clothing that dresses, all kinds of things that were styled with Japanese maples as being the artwork on them. So they were just really beautiful pieces. Some of these were very old, from many centuries ago. So we had this huge collection of this rare, basically maple artwork that he'd been collecting for years there. Had it all filed away in different shelving there in different rooms. It was really interesting. So he could roll out all these different areas and show you like different maple tapestries and things like that from the past. It was just so cool to see just, his overall love for maples and how it expanded in so many different directions, from art to the photography he was doing to a lot of this clothing.
Now, an interesting thing about Masayoshi Yano's book, if you ever get a hold of one, you'll notice underneath some of the cultivars, it'll say A, and it'll have a semicolon there. And then sometimes it'll say M. Yano. Well, that A, whatever follows after that semicolon, that is who actually found and introduced the tree. Now, sometimes it says record. That means, we don't know exactly who found it, but here's the record of where I know about this plant from. And then sometimes it says distributor, which means this person carries this tree. Now, the interesting thing about that is there's a huge portion in Yano's book of trees that he introduced. His book is full of it. And when you're going through here and looking at an interesting tree like Nishiki Yamato, it says it's introduced by Yano, and it says a cultivar from seedlings of Arakawa Momiji. And it says it takes no more than 5 years to get the roughened bark. He goes through and describes this tree and says, I found this tree in 1988. It wasn't just about looking through seedlings. He really enjoyed Japanese maples everywhere he went. For instance, Koyama Dani Nishiki was a seedling he collected in the Shiga Prefecture. off of an Iroha Momiji, which means like the mountain maple, the Acer Matsumuri style. Kagakujaku was found in a garden. It wasn't, a seedling he found. He just really thought this tree in the Ishikawa prefecture at this garden was really beautiful. And there's so many things like this that when you start going around and reading his books, it tells you the history behind his introductions. It tells you the history behind introductions that, other people found as well. And you realize he was a student of Japanese maples. And he became a master that then is passing this on for people for generations to come.
Oh, Yano-san wasn't just about the collecting. The guy had all the science behind everything. He was doing genetics testing before we were here in the United States. He had all these different theories and things he was proving about Japanese maples. And I only wish that I knew more Japanese to have smarter questions to ask him, because he was explaining so many next level things to Tim and I through his research that he was pushing forward. And if Yano-san had questions, he would get with some of the top scientific minds in Japan and get different universities to kind of prove him right or wrong. So there's several different instances where he would say, well, I have this theory, and then he would basically go through some of the universities and some of the experts to prove whether the species was correct or not. And again, early in the genetic testing, like he was taking stuff straight to genetics right away to prove his point. And so you couldn't argue with it when he was, when he had everything laid out the way he did. It was like, wow, this is brilliant.
But Yano, it was interesting because he was passionate about this. When you went to go visit him, you didn't see someone who was very stoic. You saw someone with a big smile on his face.
Yeah.
You saw someone that was excited to share what he loved about these trees with other people. And that was what I loved so much about him, was he was a teacher, but he also just loved sharing his passion in any way possible about Japanese maples.
When you find somebody that loves something on that level the same way you do, like he could tell that we were crazy about maples. And this is going to sound weird, but like Yano-san's much older than us. It felt like a couple kids playing, like we were goofing off. Like it felt like you'd met a buddy and you were out at the park. Like it was more of a kinship and a fun thing than it was, we were soaking up every bit of information we could. And he obviously could tell that we were there to be respectful and learn as much as we could. And so he didn't give us the mailed-in tour. He gave us the every bit of the place tour. And I'll never forget that because it was so much fun. Now we got to go and look at all the different specimens in the ground, container specimens, again, all the different collections. But that place is so extensive in its maple catalog. Basically, his idea was to document each of these as well.
Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about this in terms of music, it'd be like if you went and met up with the best guitar player ever, like Jimi Hendrix, and then he said, "Hey, let's have a jam session." Like that's what it was like. We got to go through World Maple Park and have a maple jam session, just talking about all these cool trees, and it was one of the best times we could have ever had, going around talking and with Kazu and at Sushi Homa. I mean, being able to have these fun conversations with Yano through these translators. And, Yano took this professionally, but he also just had a blast.
Oh, you could tell.
The garden.
You could tell, again, Yano-san's the expert. That's why we call him Yano-san. He is the master of this, and we were there to learn. But I appreciate how much he was interested in what interested us. And so if things got me and Tim excited, if there were species or seedlings from species that we really got into, he kind of fed on that a little bit. He was really into it. He was like, so, he was talking to the translator, like, so what else do you want to see like a variegated one of? I might could find something that, so he was really into what are these guys into? Let's talk about it some more. So I just really dug that. We had such a fun time geeking out, just being goofy maple people, and getting to ask him so many questions and tour this place. Now, an amazing time to visit is typically in fall. We went right before peak fall color, but some things had kind of started there. Really just a beautiful area.
Yeah, and the fun thing was just running around when Yano would say, "Oh, you've got to check out this new selection. This is a new selection from this one part of Japan." And then we'd go over and check out this cool Japanese maple that was just, unlike anything you see in the United States. And that's what was so fun about this, was two different cultures, two different generations, but getting to just share our love and passion for Japanese maples with each other. And that's the thing that I'd like to say most about Masayoshi Yano is, he was a photographer, and he was an amazing photographer, and he was a maple expert. and he was a darn good maple expert. But he was just a good person. And he was a person who was very generous with his time, very generous with allowing us to, go around and collect seed, but also just generous with being able to share, everything that he could possibly teach us about Japanese maples.
Yeah, one of the other things we were trying to do on this trip was go and visit Tsukasa Maple. Now, we'd emailed him and set up a time, but right as the trip was approaching, we got an email from him actually as we're walking on the plane, and it said, "I'm sorry, but I won't be able to meet you this time." Now, he's a good friend of Masayoshi Yano's, so after we kind of warmed up to Yano-san some, we said, "Do you know why Yanada Tanaka isn't going to meet with us?" And he said he would love to, but he doesn't have a translator. And we said, "Would you mind reaching out to him and asking if we provided a translator?" Because we kind of butted up to Yano at this point. So Yano was so cool about this. Like he actually reached out to him and said, "We'd love to meet with you if there's somebody to talk with." His whole point was he didn't want to spend time with you if he couldn't talk to you because he thought it would be frustrating for you both. And so it was so cool that he was even reaching out to other places for us, kind of opening doors up. And because of that, Tim and I got to go and learn a ton at Tsukasa Maple and get a ton of documentation on the names, the facts, his introductions. And a great deal of that was because Yano extended that olive branch for us and made sure that we could go with a translator. And he was so gracious to provide translators. Like I said, he didn't have one, but 3 guys there, 2 younger guys, and then another guy that were just there in case we had questions. And they were horticulturally minded as well. So it was what was so cool about it is he had really been wise in who he offered to come and be translators that day because they could answer a lot of questions for us, but they could also relay a lot of the horticulture terms that we may be talking about with Yano-san. So it was beyond gracious to kind of have the team he'd put together to receive us there that day.
Now, Masayoshi Yano, if any of y'all were able to purchase Acer palmatum collected from Yoshino Trail, that is because when we had our seed collecting permits and we asked Yano where is one of the best places we can go collect seed, he said we should go visit Yoshino Trail. And we actually went where the Yoshino cherries are so famous for and hiked around that trail and collected palmatums because Yano had set that up for us.
Now, this is just making me itch to get back over to Japan. We may have to take another trip this fall. I don't know. We'll see. It'd be a little bittersweet without Yano-san because he was so much fun, and I'd always dreamed of getting back over there to visit him. His generosity was just unmatched with his time. And some of the greats are just like that. I'm sure we'll do one of these on Peter Gregory, who felt like family as well. But I really appreciate how much Yano-san could feed off Tim and I's excitement and know that we cared about this too. And so there was a kinship there. There was really kind of a warmth there. I mean, there's a big language barrier. There's an age barrier. My goodness, here's these 2 crazy guys from the mountains of North Carolina that want to come learn about Japanese maples. But I think he was so cool to us because, we were into the same thing and he could tell we got it like he got it. Like, you know what I mean? Like we had that maple bug and it was just really cool to kind of have that camaraderie with him that we got to go and share in that.
I know it's one of these things where when we found out about this book, we tried to find everything we could possibly find out about Yano-san. And we'd found Yano-san on Facebook and we were like, is this really him? And it was so cool when we started getting that camaraderie there. One of the things I found, which I don't know if it's still up or not, was Yano's website. He had a Genshukate website where you could go and he would have his blog about, things happening at the nursery.
A lot like Talon Buchholz.
A lot like Talon Buchholz. And you could go read up on different cultivars. That's one of the reasons I, learned a lot about Hanamatoi from his website. Mm-hmm. And it was so cool actually getting to meet this legend whenever it came to maples.
Now, Yano did pass last year. I've reached out to several of our friends who were translators during the time. They said that a nonprofit has bought World Maple Park and is keeping it up, that's kind of purchased the rights to take care of it. I'm hoping to follow up on this by giving you guys some information about that. Maybe we can go there in the future, see how things are going, and kind of check in on some of the Yano-san's selections there as well.
Now, if you get Yano's book for maples, it's going to have cool plants that you won't find in America, and it's going to have some cool plants that we're going to have coming on soon on Mr. Maple, like Katsuraga-san or Japonicum Oji no Sen, things like Ryogoji and Chokaji that... He was very gracious through other friends of making sure that we got some of his favorite selections. So Yano found ways to legally get them to us and to get us signwood to America through people who could bring things in. So he made sure to get us several selections that were really interesting, that meant a lot to him. Yeah. And for instance, he not only introduced cool trees, but he had so much he had so much that he touched that became so popular in the trade. For instance, Kurinagishi, he didn't find or introduce that tree, but he's the one who put the name of Red Lionhead on Kurinagishi.
He was so keen on what we were doing too. I mean, Yano was very excited. I never had the honor of getting him a hot blonde. This was 9 years ago when we visited, but he was very interested in the selection. He really liked that we were trying to pick things in Acer Olivierum. We had a long conversation about this, and he thought this was a great idea, for the durability, and he was doing something similar too. And so it was really cool to kind of talk to him about that and inspire us to keep pushing those heat seekers.
Now, if you get through his book, you can actually go through and check out his bibliography. You can see that he studies history of maples even back to the 1600s, and then goes through all the way until he's publishing this book. One thing I thought was really interesting is towards the back that I hadn't really noticed before is that he had his monthly gardening schedule in the book. So you can actually go through month by month what he would be looking for doing at World Maple Park, which is interesting because, this is essentially his notes on how to keep World Maple Park running.
Right. Now, I would love to share this book more with you guys. Yano-san actually sent us a Gem Mint 10 encarded version of this book as a gift from Japan after we went and visited him. There'll be a Mr. Maple I Dig Japanese Maples t-shirts there somewhere in the clothing section as well. We gave him one of those back in the day, and some gifts from Western North Carolina, some woodwork. But one of the cool things about this book is he did give us the rights to make future copies. Now, Tim and I may do that. We may not. We have reached out before to Hisao Nakajima, who's the translator of this book. Super nice guy. I've never met him in person, so I don't feel comfortable doing it until I get a little bit more permissions from him as well. But he did kind of help translate this book for Masayoshi Yano. Yano-san has said we have full permission to make duplicates of this book. I have a letter from him talking about that. So maybe something we can pursue in the future. Maybe getting you guys a digital copy or something, finding a way to kind of share some of the stuff with you guys from Yano-san in a good, ethical way. I'm not saying we're definitely going to be able to do that, but that's something we would love to be able to provide. Because Yano-san gifted that to us. I have some cool books from Hisao Nakajima that were handmade that he had sent Talon Buckholz. So maybe I'll reach out to Talon to get the hold of him now since we got the Talon connection. We tried to drive through by his house one time, but we couldn't quite narrow down where he was at.
We also have some actual books made of the photography from Yano-san that would have almost been like a precursor to this book that he gave Talon Buckholz.
Handmade stuff.
Handmade photography where he photographed it and then went in and wrote the cultivar name on it.
I've been trying to think of the right way to handle some of this stuff. We may have a login Patreon or something in the future, or a login section of our website, or a members only section. I don't know what that's going to look like, so don't quote me on that. But I do have handmade stuff that only Tim and I have. And it's stuff from Yano. It's stuff from Japan that's just next level. It's writings between Talon and several different people in Japan where they're sending him pictures and cultivars, and they're sharing stuff. So it's stuff Talon gifted us even before we purchased Buckholz Nursery, and said, take care of this and preserve it for the next generation. Well, I can't think of a better way to do that than to be able to share some of that with you guys. So we may look into seeing if we can provide this book on a login basis or something like that. So it's not just live on the internet if anybody is selling it through Japanese Maple Publishing Group, but I'll talk to them and see what we can do. As far as Yano was concerned, he gave us full permission to republish the book even.
So, y'all, Yano-san, Maple legend, one of the people that I would put on the Mount Rushmore of Japanese maples. He's a person that is near and dear to mine and Matt's heart because he was so passionate about it. He had such influence on maples across the world. Many of you may even have his introductions in your garden here on the other side of the world in the United States. Many of y'all have his introductions in Europe for our international viewers. So, this is a person who has changed, what people think of maples and made them more mainstream.
Guys, if you like this kind of content, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's the Mr. Maple Show. Find us on your favorite podcast platform. Give us 5 stars. And so you can support us by shopping at MrMaple.com. Nobody gives you more free Japanese maple related content than MrMaple.com. We do it 7 days a week on the Mr. Maple Show YouTube. And there's always something new and exciting. We love telling you our personal anecdotes, our stories. And you'll see why we're so crazy about this. Tim, whenever we can, we took time to go and meet the greats. We learned when we missed out on meeting Harold Johnston. We had reached out to Harold a few times. And then one of the next times we went to visit Harold Johnson, he had passed away the day before. And so Tim and I learned from that, and we said, don't let this ever happen again. And that was one of the greatest gifts Harold Johnson could give us, because, when it came time to buy several $1,000 plane tickets to go see Yano's son, we said, get our butts on that plane and go see Yano in person. I'm so glad we did, because it's such a great memory. It's such a fun time that we got to share with him. And I get to have a little piece of a memory of a legend like Yano's son.
Thanks, y'all, for listening today. Take care.
God bless.
And have a great day.